Please welcome our panel. Hi. Awesome. Well, welcome everyone. I'll just do a quick introduction of all of you. Obviously, you've met all of them already, with the exception of one, because they've given fantastic talks already. So we have Fabian to the very left of me. Then we have Morten. I'm just rehearsing the names, my apologies on that. We have Marley, and we have Jule here. And then the one person you have not met yet is Lacey. And Lacey is a director at Alex Partners. And she helps companies develop and implement programs to transform software engineering groups, IT departments, as well as analytics organizations. And she also works to interpret and apply emerging technologies like Web3 and IoT, as well as AI. So yeah, welcome all of you. I'm very excited to have you and can't wait to hear your thoughts. So I'll just use the title of our panel as a jumping off point. As we just discussed briefly, obviously in a lot of discourses there are seemingly only utopias and dystopias, only black and white. And it seems like the whole discussion around the future of work is one of them. I'd love to hear from all of you. What do you think, what factors are contributing to making this such a complex and convoluted topic? Anyone who wants to start?
Everybody's a little shy here, I guess,
Bring it.
right? So let me try. Well, I think, it's just an unprecedented moment that we're in right now, and we weren't prepared. We were just in a very classic kind of cluster of rules that we were going through. But yeah, where is this going? Utopia in a positive way, dystopia negative. I think it's an opportunity that we have to embrace ultimately. That's what I said previously, right? It's a once in a lifetime opportunity that we have. I still feel that the leaders, the bosses, the corporations are reserved and maybe even negative, right? And try to imply more rules. And I think that's the problem that I see. So I believe that's where we need to break out. But yeah, I absolutely believe it's a fundamental opportunity for us here.
But, sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
I just wanted to disagree on this one point, also related to Morten's talk that we heard earlier, namely that this is unprecedented. This, I think, is an important thing. Of course, we went through all this, as we just saw, times of low inequality overall in the society, economic-wise, and we even had this term of, the end of history in the 1990s. We know this has all not happened, but I think we had exponential growth and really times of huge transformation that, unfortunately, led to a dystopic future in the early 20th century. So I think, of course, Morten, you brought the point that, these previous transformations were linear, now it's exponential. I think, they're scale-free. Back then, 100 years ago, they were also exponential, but just from the point of view in the early 20th century. So I think it is important to look back into history, because we saw dystopia already happening with the First World War and everything that happened afterwards. So I think it is a huge opportunity, that's true, but I think we should look back to understand how inequalities could be managed better.
And
I would disagree. I think you can compare, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Lacey.
Yeah, good. No, I think that this huge sort of deviation in how people think about the future of work, especially from a technology perspective, comes from the fact that we're not that great at thinking about and predicting what reality looks like in the future. So we respond way too fast. It can be a fear response or a response to opportunity, or way too slow if we think about climate change, for example. And it's very difficult, I think, as a society for us to anticipate how quickly a change will come. I think on the topic, especially around the future of work with technology, it comes from a reaction to fear, the dystopia vision, and utopia is probably people that are more prone to optimism, and they think that a lot of the change in technology can just be done with the snap of a finger, and it's actually a lot of work.
I'd actually like to jump in there with an extra question to all of you. What do all of you think would be helpful to sort of bring these two extremes together? Because it seems like even in the larger discourse, and even probably represented here right now, there are more of these extremes between sort of utopia and dystopia. What can we do to make the discourse more nuanced? Because it seems like nuance may be lacking sometimes, not with all of you, obviously, but just in the general discussion. Yeah, Jule?
Couldn't agree more, and actually very much agree with your point in saying we're not very good at predicting, and that's very true. And why do we have this binary thinking, right? Black or white, there's never gray. Humans think in heuristics, right? In very kind of mental shortcuts. And then we tend to connect to our peer group. And so we communicate to the same closed bubble where everybody agrees with us, right? And then we tend to opt towards the one side or opt towards the other side. Instead, right, we might look at utopia and dystopia as sort of opposite ends of a spectrum, right? What it really is. And think of practicing our skills for perspective, one of the key actually strengths of positive psychological literature was just taking a step back and seeing the bigger picture, going into debate, healthy debate, and understanding what is maybe a holistic picture of the situation as opposed to, you know, one or the other. Yeah.
Any further ideas on that?
Quite a psychological conversation here, you know. I'm not prepared for that, to be honest. But
You
no
can
worries.
shift it.
Look, I don't think I'm the super optimist, but I think that's our only chance, you know, to look at it in a more kind of positive and optimistic way, right? And I think technology can solve a lot of stuff if we use it in the right way, right? And if we not just use it to make money and destroy our planet. And I think that's fundamental here, that we change that thinking. So I think, you know, if we think too much about dystopia, all right, let's jump from the bridge or, you know, I don't know, do something else. I think we have to embrace some certain type of optimism here and, you know, to try to create a better future. And I fully agree that we've been way too slow to adapt, to understand, and now actually, you know, we're spending money on arms again instead of fixing the climate problem.
Well, it almost sounds like essentially the dystopian view could prevent us from doing something about the downsides or the negative things, where what I'm hearing from you is essentially let's embrace optimism because there is maybe a certain inevitability to progress. Let's use that as a means to look at the downsides too, if I got that right. Yeah, go on.
One idea on the optimism part, I like to use the word possibilism.
Oh.
Because optimism has this connotation of delusion. And if you think of possibilism, it's based on facts and reality. So sometimes it helps to think about pessimism and possibilism. To kind of
And I think on that point, I think both of the ends of the spectrum are driven by imagining what's possible, but introducing the element of timing. How fast can a lot of this happen actually, I think can tone down maybe the emotional response that comes to the vision of the future. Because even just because a lot of these things are possible doesn't mean that they're going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years. And that gives us more time to adapt as a society.
Awesome, thank you.
I think the corporate conversations that I listen to, they are, to use the terms here, they are utopian. There's very little dystopian elements in those. Upbeat, optimistic. It's about, you know, opportunity, profit maximization, cool products, yada yada, and the whole shebang. The utopian toned conversations happen elsewhere, and so probably at least if you want to connect corporate leaders to this, that's the challenge. One of the things that I pay attention to is how senior leaders whom I've known and followed for many years, they suddenly now show up with LGBT plus color T-shirts and have political standpoints in public. I mean, of course, they always have, but never in public before. They take stands on all kinds of things, and so they're folks that are very conservative and risk averse. They are beginning as corporate leaders to understand that they are expected to have opinions about things, also things that don't involve or connect with their company directly. And that would be an opening, I think, for also to listen to, for them to consider potential, if you will, dystopian consequences of some of digitalization. I actually think that they are at a point where they would be open to having those kinds of reflections, because they appreciate that their responsibility as corporations exceed what used to be.
So
This
when
is
I
actually
see LGBTQ, whatever, T-shirts, flags on profiles of leaders on LinkedIn, I think it's fake, to be honest. You know, every time I see it, I'm like, come on, you know, what are you marketing for? New talent?
And this is actually a perfect segue to the next question, because I would love to make this a bit more concrete and talk about to what degree and in what ways do companies actually have to change in order to attract and retain talent in the future? Like, are rainbow flags on LinkedIn profiles the solution? Let's actually not discuss that, because I think no, but so what do you think? How do companies have to change? All of you.
Well, I'd say that heavily depends on the organization, right? I think we have a toxic culture in new work where we say everybody has to change in that one direction, in that particular way. But the fact is that organizations are very different and industries are very different. The hospitality industry has to do very different things to be attractive for employees as opposed to the tech industry, right? So that's the first thing, right? Think of the different nuances, and also think of an organization, okay, who do we need to be and what kind of statements do we have to make, for example, as leaders, right? What kind of statements do we have to make, of course, to be, yes, attractive, but also credible towards our internal employees and to the outside. So I would say it's very diverse. So I wouldn't be able to say that's the one culture. I think one step that organizations can definitely take is to be much more open in their ears, to listen to their employees of who they actually are and what they actually want. I talked about this a little bit in my keynote, because a lot of organizations think they know, and a lot of leaders think they know, and they push a culture down people's throats. But actually, you know, if you give the space for employees to hear their voices, then that's the first step.
Yeah.
I would like to say that a lot of positive things have already been undertaken, at least, you know, from what we see in some of these, you know, superstar companies, Silicon Valley and so on and so forth. It's not to say that this is, you know, the everyday company, but I think many of the rules or many of the ideas to engage employees, you showed this beautiful form of a Maslow pyramid, Lena, regarding the idea of, you know, engaging employees more. I think this is definitely a key development. You know, people want to get heard, people want to be involved. So I think, you know, for the just, you know, standard small company, more or less all the recipes are out there already. They would just need, you know, to be applied on in a systematic way.
I don't want to take Morten's topic, so maybe I'll keep it short and you'll cover this, but one thing that we have to do as a consulting firm is continually train our people, especially if they're going to be relevant to, you know, develop machine learning models to automate other companies' processes. Most of us didn't come in with that skill set, so creating a culture where it's okay to, you know, research or look up how to do something on GitHub, and somebody sees that on your screen, right, and not feeling insecure about that, but then also, you know, proactively training.
I think every, thank you, and every, is it 2 years, I forget, Deloitte Consulting runs the largest sort of young people, young workforce survey globally. Is it, I don't know, 15, 20,000 respondents, and you can track it then over time, it's on the net. So generation Y and Z, and you ask them, what do you want from your employer? And that's changed considerably. And you know, that connects to what we've been talking about previously, because they want stuff that didn't or wasn't considered relevant before. They want corporations to help fix social inequality. It's one of the responses that's come up in the past, I think, 3-4 years. Never, it wasn't on top anything. Now it is. They want you to address income inequality. They want you to address gender inequality. I mean, they want corporations, and this is a global survey with some bias toward the US, but it's heavy on European data as well. They want corporations to fix social problems. And that's purpose to them, right? And purposeful. And that's part of what you need. And that's why you have CEOs running around with the T-shirts. That's what you need to begin to get your head around if you want to attract and retain young people.
I think leaders need to be authentic, and they can't be. I think that's their biggest problem. So for me, it will be interesting, how as a consultancy can you teach authenticity?
I don't think you can.
So they have a problem, I think, because this is one of the factors that will, enable them to not only retain, but, get future talent. And I think that's a problem. And then again, they won't fix any social problems. They're all capitalists, they're driven by the top line. It's all about revenues, right? And of course, you can market everything and, you can make it look nice, but reality is different, I run a startup, I work with VCs. They're capitalists, they can't be creative.
So now I would like to disagree and take the capitalist hat on. I think, we saw, all these beautiful pictures of the overall economic development over the past 100 years, and we all know this obviously from the history books. So I think we have seen a lot of benefits that are enabled by the coalition of democracy, academic, scientific research, and capitalism.
Absolutely.
So the incentives need to be right. If the incentives are not right, we talk, well, of course, I think what you have in mind is environmental problems, and there the incentives are not right. Obviously, there is no right price at the moment on a global scale for CO2 emissions and so on and so forth. And then obviously companies will not take this into account. And why should they? Because they are responsible to their shareholders and so on. So there we have the profit maximization issue. But I think if only the incentives are aligned, capitalism will be the system that is solving the environmental and other crises that are out there.
But I think,
not if the incentives
I think, and thank you for being the historian in the room. I mean, the vehicle of the corporation is also not necessarily the ideal vehicle to address social anything really. But if selling more stuff means that you have to wrap it differently in recycled whatever, you're probably going to do it. But it's not necessarily the right vehicle to address social problems.
Sure, but at the same time, if there is a workforce that's just growing into the market that is actively demanding those kinds of things, as you just cited, I don't think corporations should be the solution to these problems, but I think it's interesting if suddenly there's a very different kind of pressure from the employees that these companies need in terms of positioning themselves, or at least in terms of developing a stance. I mean, we saw all of this just in the last years with the Black Lives Matter protests, for example, which led to a lot of internal debates at a lot of companies. And I personally think that's a really good thing. Those shouldn't be the solution, but they're definitely an interesting factor. And I would love to use that because we just have 7 minutes left, unfortunately. I'd love to hear from all of you. What do you think the future of work is actually going to look like? Will we work more, will we work less, or will we just work differently?
I mean, most likely, unfortunately, from what most of the academic research papers on the topic, automatization and future of work point towards, is more and more polarization between a small cast of high-skill, high-demand people, also high-skilled, high-educated people that don't get high wage level. That the particular problem, because then this promise of education is broken. I think also, Jule, you talked about this, if I'm not mistaken, and a large low-skill or high-skill, low-wage service sector element. That the dystopian perspective that is drawn quite substantially, and if nothing significant happens, this is unfortunately probably going to happen.
I'd say we have today more choice than ever to work how much we want. So I could live on Bali, work 2 days a week and have a fantastic life. Yeah, I can work my ass off 7 days a week and, maybe have also a great life or not so great. So I think today we really have more choice than ever, right? And I think that's where people can choose.
Isn't that a very privileged view?
And I was going to say the future is here, but it's unequally distributed. So that's one version of the future that's here today. But there are a lot of Mittelstand companies here or the equivalent in other countries that's not a reality yet. And I think a key question is when? When is the future? Is it...
And for whom?
In 5 years, is it 10, or is it in 200? And when do different groups of people get to realize that future?
What do you think?
I think that it's a lot slower than we imagine. I mean, most of my teams are actually proactively trying to bring that future about. And, I think then there's a question of who benefits, which creates the dystopia, utopia, but it's really hard work. It takes a lot of time. It takes really skilled people to actually, from a tech perspective, automate work. And I don't see it happening in the next 10 years at least.
Yeah.
And maybe just from the very privileged perspective, an elitist perspective of knowledge workers, right? The 4-day, because you're asking, are we working more or less, right? Now, it again depends on which part of the workforce we're looking at. But the 4-day work week for knowledge workers. That's not really a revolution anymore, right? There's a lot of tests out there. Some failed, some were successful. But I think we're asking the wrong question here. First, we're in full agreement, right? It can't be that a smaller chunk of the workforce works less and working conditions get worse for the larger chunk of the workforce, right? But then again, we're asking the wrong question, because the question should be, how can we make work for those employees, right? So they stay in our companies, and so they're thriving, and so they're productive, and so they're healthy. And so it's not so much about working more or working less, but how can I create a work environment that is acceptable and that works for me, in a sense.
Yeah, to put my statement into perspective, I think the general worker will work more, right? Inflation, higher energy prices and such, it will just continue like that. So I think people will have to work multiple jobs potentially to feed their family, right? And yes, I agree. We're privileged with a certain education and, you know, where we are.
What does that mean? Like, where does that leave us in terms of like the future of work and creating it?
There is a sense of dystopia right now in this group, right? So how do we turn this around and we think of, okay, where's the possibilist in us? And to the direct answer of your question, it takes, first of all, of course, debates like this to think about, okay, what are the things that organizations need to change, right? But it also takes conversations around what do we need to do as organizations right now, right? So we can both thrive as organizations in the future and then contribute to solving, play our part in solving the societal challenges that we've been talking about here. And I think that, yes, we can be very frustrated, but we can also think of, okay, what's happening here is great, right? There's so many opportunities right now at this very moment to jump on board this wave, as opposed to sort of just give up, right? And be frustrated. Yeah.
One element that we haven't talked about, but I think is an important one. So I think one pre-requirement here of many of these debates were a technologically based change, AI, computer, data, and so on and so forth. And one part of the solution is clearly, in my opinion, the use and application of these technologies, data points that are available to that is true, an unprecedented case in history, to manage these kind of things. So we are now in a situation in the 21st century to understand and manage social systems and predict what is happening system-wide in a way that was previously only possible in physical systems like, you know, natural sciences and so on. And I think this can be used, and it is being used already. We saw it to a great extent throughout the corona pandemic, where we had, you know, people asking for more data being gathered about infection chains and networks to prevent further infections. So a social process to manage it, and overall I think it was done in a very well way. And this could also be applied, and there is this tendency towards datafication also in ministries and governmental organizations all over the world. I'm not talking about autocratic regimes like China. I'm talking about, you know, doing it in a democratically aligned way to manage labor market of the future. And I think this is one part of the recipe to the solution.
So what does the data predict? Dystopia or utopia?
Yeah, I think unfortunately so far dystopia, but this is, you know, the unmanaged system, and of course a lot could be done in terms of upskilling in the right way. That is not giving everyone just coding skills, but give those people coding skills that have complementary skills already. This is actually a research project a colleague of mine is working on at the moment, yeah, trying to enable every person with the right type of skill set, and not just giving, you know, as it was done maybe in the 1990s here in former Eastern Germany, just bringing everyone into some kind of vocational additional training, but rather giving the right types of skill sets to the right people.
Well, I think.
But there's a positive story here as well, right? And so digitalization is this push of technology into the space of work, and so it'll take over some and leave other bits for us. Those other bits are the fundamentally human bits, or the bits that require fundamentally human skills, including creativity and the ability to connect with other people and read between the lines, emotion. And so there's an opportunity to, you know, reconfigure who we are, what we bring to work and to our professional careers, because it'll be less mechanic and more emotional, more soft, if you will.
Yep.
The human genius, because that's what will be left.
And that's actually, I think, a beautiful way to close this, because what I would like to summarize between this sort of utopia and dystopia, I think there's a lot of possibility. We heard that. I think there's also a lot of things for all of us to work through, but one thing that stood out for me is just the role of leaders, the role of companies and all of that, because there is a higher need for responsibility, for asking the hard questions to assess sort of how can we actually deal with these opportunities in a responsible way, how can we deal with demands that new generations of workers have, and how can we sort of make ourselves future ready in a way that's still grounded in the realities of our societies and ultimately in support not just of business growth but also of humanness and of human connection. So thank you so much to all our panelists. Please join me in giving them a hand. Thank you for all your opinions, and it was a really great pleasure to have you. Please stay seated for a second.
Well, thanks a lot, Lena, for the wonderful moderation. You did not promise too much. Dystopia, utopia, one could really see the battle raging between the two poles. It was almost like watching Lord of the Rings and light and darkness moving forth and back. So thanks a lot for that panel. It was really a pleasure.
Thanks to the panel.